Just say it, man. Don't make me ask 20 questions.
What is the point?
Get to the point.
Just say it already.
Welcome to the Podcram. Here are some fun political and conspiratorial highlights from the Joe Rogan Experience 2138 with guest Tucker Carlson.
There are all kinds of economic forces, which nobody ever mentions, that drive that heedlessness, that stupidity. Like California, for example, is like collapsing. Yeah. And they're betting everything on AI. For the tax base is going to be dependent on this technology working.
Is that really what they're betting on?
Of course. That AI is...
Did you see the most recent thing about the amount of billions of dollars they spent on the homeless problem with no trackable results?
Well, they've had massive results. They've increased the homeless population dramatically. If you pay for something, you get more of it. And that would include fentanyl addicts. Oh, absolutely. It's been a wild success. I actually talked to Gavin Newsom the other day.
Did you really?
Yeah. And
what's that like? Does he smell like sulfur?
It was by phone. I was talking to him on the phone. It's such a weird... he smelled like... that was too fast for me.
Sulfur and hair grease.
Yeah. No, but I was making fun of... I shouldn't even make fun of it because it's so tragic, but what's happened to the state and people living on the street.
What is his non-gaslighty perspective?
He said, go back to Russia. You like Russia so much. I was like, I'm originally from San Francisco, but I can't live there because...
He really told you to go back to Russia?
Of course. I mean, he was laughing, whatever. He's a perfectly charming guy. They all are in person. But
of course.
Anyway, I'm so far afield. But my point is, AI is being driven by the greed of politicians to some extent. And you'll notice that AI, by the way, as a fact, those data centers that drive our digital life, which is not life, it's actually death mostly. But, they're the biggest power draw. How much electricity does AI require? Like more than countries. Mm-hmm. Our grid can't handle AI just as a practical matter.
Well, our grid can't handle electric cars.
Well, it can't handle air conditioning in the state of California, where I'm from. So, right. If you live east of I-5 where it's really hot and you're not getting those ocean breezes, like they have brownouts, like in South Africa. It's Johannesburg now. So, but here's what's interesting is that none of the global warming cultists seem to have any concerns at all about AI. Why is that? Just like they don't have concerns about John Kerry's G4. Like somehow that's exempt. Really? AI is going to draw more electricity than anything else in the United States, more than steel production, okay? Used to. And you don't have a problem with that, but you're totally against energy because it's destroying the planet, but AI gets a carve out, even though it's going to be the number one energy draw in the United States? Let's go through your reasoning on that.
They're probably not aware.
Well, they're not aware. They're mad about my wood stove. I heat with wood. They're mad about my wood stove. They don't want an outdoor barbecue. Mm-hmm. They don't like a gas stove. No, they're way into the details on this stuff, except somehow AI isn't a problem.
Do you know who Colion Noir is?
I know him.
Yeah, great guy. He opened my eyes to the homelessness thing. We had him on the podcast, and he was explaining how he was in San Francisco, and he was like, what is this? Is like, they don't have any money for this? Is that what it is? Yeah. Like, no. There's a whole business behind it.
Of course.
And these people that are running this homelessness initiative or whatever the fuck they call it, they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Some of them $250,000 a year.
Imagine making money off the homeless.
And not doing a goddamn thing.
Alex Jones is an interesting person. And when you hear Alex Jones talk, you may not agree with everything he says. I don't know that I do. But he's also channeling some stuff. You can't call 9/11 in detail because you're super informed.
Before the fact.
He called it.
Yes.
He literally called it. In the summer of 2001, he said planes will fly into the World Trade Centers and they will blame a man called Osama bin Laden. We know that he said that because he said it on tape multiple times. And then he said, call the White House and tell them this. Now, that's all we know about Alex Jones. Let's just say that's the fact set. How'd that happen?
Right. How did he do that?
No, he's channeling something.
You think
that's
so?
Super. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There's like no other. I mean, tell me how he did it otherwise. I've asked him about it. How did you do that? At length, he had dinner in my barn recently. We were talking about this. How'd you do that? I don't know. It just came to me. And that's real. That is real. The supernatural is real. And I don't know why it's so hard for the modern mind, I guess because it's a materialist mind, to accept that. But and that's not a new phenomenon. It's happened throughout history. There are people called prophets. And there are people who were prophets who weren't called prophets, but there are people who have information or parts of information, bits of information, visions of information come to them, and then they relay it. It's not from them. They received it. This is like one of the oldest phenomena in human history. So those people tend to be a little crazy, a little imbalanced, a little different from everybody else. Do you know what I mean? They live on locusts and honey in the wilderness. I mean, that's just like they're not like everybody else. And that's clearly part of what – I'm not saying that everything that Alex Jones says is a prophecy from God. It's not. But that was prophetic. And if it wasn't, tell me how it wasn't. In July of 2000 – like I lived in Washington in July of 2001. My dad worked in the government. Like I was as well informed as anybody could be about what was going on in the government. I've always been interested in what's happening in other countries. I was aware of Osama bin Laden. I knew about the Taliban. I knew, more than most people. There's not one person who was saying, not one person in Washington, D.C. was saying, at some point soon, they may fly airplanes into the World Trade Centers and blame Osama bin Laden. Like that just wasn't a thing. So if you said that multiple times on camera, there's a reason. Like, and everyone, I've said this to 50 people, what I just said to you, and they all look at me like, yeah, that's stupid. Tell me how it's stupid. Like, tell me how he did that. Like, that's impossible, actually.
He didn't just do it with that either.
No, I'm aware.
He's done it with a lot of things. And that's one of the more interesting things about him is that, like, he talks about stuff. Like, he talked about, like, I'm going to send this to Jamie because this is one of the really crazy ones that he called. And this is like 2017.
The elite are all about transcendence and living forever and the secrets of the universe, and they want to know all this. Some are good, some are bad, some are a mix. But the good ones don't ever want to organize. The bad ones tend to want to organize because they lust after power. Powerful consciousnesses don't want to dominate other people. They want to empower them, so they don't tend to get together until things are really late in the game. Then they come together. And the elites themselves believe they're racing using human technology to try to take our best minds and build some type of breakaway civilization where they're going to merge with machines, transcend, and break away from the failed species that is man, which is kind of like a false transmission because they're thinking what they are is ugly and bad, projecting it onto themselves instead of believing, no, it's a human test about building us up. And so Google was set up 18, 19 years ago. I knew about this before it was declassified. I'm just saying I have good sources. That they wanted to build a giant artificial system. And Google believes that the first artificial intelligence will be a supercomputer based on the neuron activities of the hive mind of humanity with billions of people wired into it with the Internet of Things. And so all of our thoughts go into it, and we're actually building a computer that has real neurons in real time that's also psychically connected to us, that are organic creatures, so that they will have current prediction powers, future prediction powers, a true crystal ball. But the big secret is, once you have a crystal ball and know the future, you can add stimuli beforehand and make decisions that control the future. And so then it's the end of consciousness and free will for individuals, as we know, and a true 2.0 in a very bad way, hive mind consciousness with an AI jacked into everyone, knowing our hopes and dreams, delivering it to us, not in some PKD wirehead system where we plug in and give up on consciousness because of unlimited pleasure, but because we were already wired in and absorbed before we knew it by giving over our consciousness to this system by our daily decisions that it was able to manipulate and control into a larger system.
The second point that's obviously true is that people, weak people, which is a synonym for bad people, come together for strength and safety. They act as one. Mm-hmm. The hive mind is specific to a certain group of people, bad people, and that good people don't tend to come together. I certainly, if you'd played that Alex Jones clip for me in 1999, I would have been, and I did see Alex Jones clips in 1999, and then in later years where he was talking about Building 7, and I was very offended. I was like outraged that he would be suggesting that there was something about 9/11 that wasn't above board, that there were, things we didn't know that were being hidden from us, and I was like mad at Alex Jones for saying that. I remember that really well. How dare you?
The Building 7 one is wild.
Well, it is wild. It is wild. I mean, all I know is 21, I don't even know what year it is, 23 years? Could it really be 23 years after 9/11? 23 years. later. What's the justification for classifying any document around 9/11? There's no justification.
Well, the same justification in classifying the documents about the Kennedy assassination.
Well, exactly, 61 years later.
Yeah, or releasing the COVID vaccine data 75 years later.
Of course.
Yeah.
Why are there a billion classified federal documents in a so-called democracy? Because they're lying to us. That's why. I mean, if you look at what happened to Richard Nixon, which I, of course, did not understand at all, Richard Nixon was taken out by the FBI and CIA, and with the help of Bob Woodward, who was a Washington Post reporter who had been a naval intelligence officer working in the White House, working in the Nixon White House. And then he shows up like a year later, and he's this brand new reporter. He'd never been a journalist at all. He's a naval intel officer. The famous Bob Woodward we all revere. And he's at the Washington Post, and somehow he gets the biggest story in the history of the Washington Post. He's the lead guy in that story. Well, I worked at a newspaper. I've been in the news business my whole life. That is not how it works. You don't take a kid like his first day from a totally unrelated business and put him on the biggest story. But he was. He was that guy. And who is his main source for Watergate? Oh, the number 2 guy at the FBI. Oh, so you have the naval intelligence officer working with the FBI official to destroy the president. Okay, so that's a deep state coup. What else? How would you describe that? If that happened in Guatemala, what would you say? And yet the way it was framed and the way that I accepted for decades was, oh, this intrepid reporter fought power. No. This intrepid reporter, Bob Woodward, was a tool of power, secret power, which is the most threatening kind, to bounce the single most popular president in American history, Richard Nixon, from office before the end of his term and replace him with who? Oh, Gerald Ford, who sat on the Warren Commission. Now, how did Gerald Ford get to be Richard Nixon's vice president? Well, because Carl Albert, the Democrat Speaker of the House, told him, you must choose him. We will only confirm him when they sent the actual elected vice president away for tax evasion, Spiro Agnew of Maryland. So you have a complete setup, like Gerald Ford, the only unelected president in American history, actually sat on the Warren Commission. Something else that I accepted at face value until I looked at it and I was like, that's completely insane. You didn't want to interview Jack Ruby in your investigation of the assassination? Okay, you're fake. Yeah, he was on the Warren Commission. And so, sorry for the long story, but the point is, like that happened in front of all of us, but the way it was framed cloaked the obvious reality of it. The people who broke into the Watergate office building, from which the name is taken, Watergate, I think it was 6 of them or 7 of them, all but one was a CIA employee. That's real. It's like, look it up on Google. So the whole thing, Richard Nixon was elected by more votes than any president in American history in the 1972 election. He was the most popular by votes, which is the only way we can really measure popularity, the most popular president in his reelection campaign. And 2 years later, he's gone. Undone by a naval intel officer, the number 2 guy at the FBI, and a bunch of CIA employees. You tell me what that is. Those are the facts. Those are not disputed facts. That's not crackpot shit. That's just look it up.
So why did they want to get rid of Nixon?
There are a lot of theories on that. I mean, first of all, we don't need to know motive to know what happened. They, meaning unelected federal employees, got rid of Richard Nixon, which is the most anti-democratic way to make a leadership change that there is. Okay? I should just say at the outset, I actually kind of believe in democracy. Obviously, it's not working well. Obviously, it's ending globally. There will never be another liberal democracy, unfortunately. But I'm attached to it because I was born here. I really believe in it. And it's better than any other system. So that's why I'm pissed. What was their motive? There are a lot of theories on this. There's an amazing conversation. It's on tape between Richard Nixon when he was still president. I think it was in 1973. And I think it was Richard Helms, the head of the CIA, though I may have fucked that up. But it was the head of the CIA. And I think it was Helms. And Nixon says, I know why they killed Jack Kennedy. So Nixon was a student of history, obviously a flawed and complicated person, but a very, very smart person. And he was really interested in why this guy who'd been president, just one president before him, was murdered. And he didn't think it was a lone gunman who was mysteriously assassinated 2 days later by another lone gunman. Like, it's so obviously bullshit. And he knew that. And he said to the CIA director, who, and you can listen to the tape, it's on the internet, is totally silent on this question. So I think there was the impression, I don't think I know, that Nixon understood that the bureaucracy was really in control of the country. It wasn't elected officials. And that's a massive threat because it's true. So, and there may have been other reasons too that I'm not privy to. Look, and by the way, I didn't even know any of this, despite having moved to Washington in high school and been around this stuff a lot. I didn't know any of that. And I know Bob Woodward personally. So I didn't, and I know Carl Bernstein personally. I even worked for Carl Bernstein briefly. So I knew some of the actual players in this, but I didn't connect the obvious dots because they weren't framed that way. That's the point I'm making. It's the way that you frame things. They're still classifying documents 61 years later. Both Trump and Joe Biden have, in violation of my read of federal law, kept those documents secret. There's no living person connected to the Kennedy assassination. It was a couple generations ago. There's no one person whose secrets are being protected. It's an institution, or maybe countries. There may have been countries involved too. I mean, I don't know the answer, but there's clearly something worth protecting. And I know that when I spoke to someone who'd seen the documents, 2 years ago, and I got one fact out of him, which is, yes, the CIA was involved. And by CIA is a huge organization, but James Jesus Angleton, the head of the operations directorate, had knowledge of this, which I think is well known. But that's the view of someone who saw the documents. So I thought that was news. So I went on TV and said that. The next day, I'll never forget it, I went quail hunting. And I was driving back, and I got a phone call from Mike Pompeo's lawyer. Mike Pompeo was the Secretary of State, but before then, he was the director of the CIA. And in that position, he plotted the murder of Julian Assange. So he is a criminal as far as I'm concerned. But his lawyer called me and said, you should know that anyone who tells you the contents of classified documents has committed a crime. He's threatening me. It was in my car. With my dog sitting next to me, I'll never forget this. And I said, are you really saying that to reveal that the U.S. government had a role in the murder of a democratically elected president, to say that out loud, that's the crime? What about the actual crime, which is murdering a president? Like, you're covering up for that, Mike Pompeo.
What did he say to that?
He had no response at all. And so Mike Pompeo is the one who pressed Trump to keep those documents secret. And so it's like, what's crazy to me is not just that Pompeo did that. I think Pompeo is a really sinister person and a criminal. I think that because the facts suggest that. He was caught. Yahoo News, Mike Isikoff wrote a long piece on this several years ago. His employees went to Mike Isikoff and said, hey, Mike Pompeo is plotting to murder Julian Assange, who's never even been charged with a crime in the United States, as CIA director. That's illegal. You're not allowed. Federal employees are not allowed to just kill people they don't like, okay? Just to set the baseline here. So that's who Mike Pompeo is. But no, he's treated as like a pillar of Republican Washington. I think it's mind-bending to watch that. And by the way, whatever. That's all I'll say.
By the way.
No, I mean, people don't say that because they're worried about getting punished. They're worried about someone putting kiddie porn on their computer.
Right.
Members of Congress are terrified of the intel agencies. I'm not guessing at that. They've told me that, including people on the Intel Committee, including people who run the Intel Committee, the people whose job it is to oversee and keep in line these enormous, secretive agencies whose budgets we can't even know. They're black budgets. They're the parents. The agencies are the children. They're afraid of the agencies. That's not compatible with democracy. Democracy is a really simple system, even representative democracy like ours. The people rule. They do so through elections. They express their preference through voting. They send their people to the capital city to run the government on their behalf. Whenever you have unelected people who are not accountable to anyone making the biggest decisions, you don't have a democracy. You have something else, another system. I would call it a tyranny or whatever you want to call it. It's not a democracy. By the way, we had FISA. We've had the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, since I think 1977. So it predates 9/11. Did it stop 9/11? Oh, I don't think it did. Shut the fuck up. You're not protecting us, actually. You open the southern border to anyone who wants to come. You're not checking IDs. You're not doing any kind of biometrics. You're not even screening for COVID. So clearly you don't care about my safety. Stop telling me you do. You don't. You're a criminal. Stop this charade. You don't care about my safety. So using my safety as a pretext for spying on me, it's not going to fly because I'm not that stupid. I may be kind of stupid. I'm not that stupid. No, you're doing this for one simple reason, because this is what organizations do. They protect themselves. They exist for their own benefit. All human organizations, from the Church Bake Sale Committee to the Department of Justice, they all are the same. They're an organism, just like any other. And an organism's main goal is to survive and reproduce, to get bigger. And you just see this throughout the federal bureaucracy. Well, it just so happens that the largest human organization in history is the federal government of the United States. And so all of this stuff benefits, it accrues to its own power. That's why, like, let's say you believed every, quote, piece of science or scientific claim about global climate change. You would not reach the same policy conclusions. You'd be like, well, the first thing we need to do is ban private air travel, because obviously that doesn't make any sense. And then the second thing we need to do is, whatever. You'd look at it rationally from a scientific, if you bought the premise, which I don't, but if you did, you would. No, you go through every climate, quote, climate demand. Not one of them disempowers large organizations, whether it's NGOs or the government of the United States. Not one of them. They all make the government more powerful, and they all make you less powerful. So that's when you know it's not really about the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere. It's about making them more powerful and disempowering you. And it's not about who runs those agencies. The bigger the agency, the more effective it will be in doing what all human organizations do, which is protect themselves and increase their power. It's like that. It's fundamental. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's not about, elect Trump, it'll change. No, it'll only change when, we're just eliminating the CIA. And we're going to have a small intel gathering service that feeds the president relevant information so we can make informed foreign policy decisions. But we're not going to overturn elections in other countries in the name of democracy, because that's insane. If we believe in democracy, then we're going to let people vote for their own leaders because we believe in democracy as a principle. Right? You just get rid of all this shit because it's not helping us. It's only hurting us. And it would take someone, who'd be willing to be assassinated to do anything like that. And so as you're choosing your leaders, ask yourself, does this person mean it enough to die? And that's the same question you would ask about your own dad. Does he love me enough to die for me? About your own husband, does he love me enough to protect me from a home invader at risk to himself? The basic prerequisite for leadership is love of the people you lead and the willingness to die for them. And if you don't have that, you shouldn't be leading, period. It's true in the military, it's true in business, it's true in your home, and it's true in the government. And so no president will fix this unless he's literally willing to die for it. And short of that, it can't be fixed.
I can think of no better way to end this conversation than that.
Thanks for listening to this installment of The Podgram. I hope it contains something useful for you. If you enjoy these selections and are curious about the curator's own thoughts, you can check out my other podcast, Psychic Lube, where I share concise concepts meant to grease the intellectual gears and help get your creative juices flowing. Each episode is an ongoing collaborative project that welcomes listeners to expand or rebut its points by email or comment, the most interesting of which get incorporated through periodic re-recordings. As always, if you're intrigued by today's content, I encourage you to go listen to the full podcast in its original form directly from its creators so that their sponsors keep paying them to make stuff for us and nobody feels compelled to sue me for copyright infringement. Now, get off your phone and go do smart stuff. Have a productive day.